Welcome to another episode of Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast. This is David Helvarg, and while Vicky's not able to join us, it's great to have Natasha Benjamin, our Associate Director at Blue Frontier, back again. Hi, Natasha.
Hey, David, great to see you.
I'm so glad you suggested we have Kassia Meador as our guest. Kassia is a longtime professional surfer, known for her stylish longboard competitions, plus grace and flow in and out of the water. In fact, the New York Times once dubbed her the Queen of Nose Riding, a technique we'll get into later. It's over 25 years since she started surfing as a teenager. She now has her own line of low-impact women's surf products, including wetsuits and yoga mats made from recycled wetsuits. She's also committed to protecting the ocean that gives her and all of us so much stoke. So, Kassia, before we get into all that, we'd like to know, as you were raised here on California's Golden Shore, what was your first experience? What's your first memory of the ocean?
Oh my gosh, I would say that my first memories, because it's kind of like if I'm thinking about it right now, just really feeling into every year we'd go down to San Diego from Los Angeles, where I grew up as a kid, and we would spend 1 week down in Solana Beach. And that's when, because growing up as a Valley kid, the ocean was like this magical place, and it was a place that we'd visit in the summer. And that's where my dad would go surfing, and I would boogie board, and later surfing, but at first it was boogie boarding, and I wouldn't get out of the water all day. And I just remember seeing the sand at that time, and I thought that San Diego had gold in the sand because it had pyrite. And it was just like these gold flakes running up and down the ocean, and just remember how clear and warm and these golden flakes. And that's really a huge and vivid memory for me when I think about, kind of early ocean memories, as well as like the movement, because I wouldn't get out of the ocean all day. I would go to sleep every night, and I would really feel this like rocking motion. And that was really a feeling that I think I've been chasing ever since.
Wow. So the golden sand of San Diego. Yeah, I had my lost decade in Ocean Beach, San Diego, body surfing there. You got seriously into board surfing around 14. How'd that evolve?
Yeah, going down there with my family every year, I really wanted to go surfing. And, it was my dad's time to go surfing. And as much as he'd get me out on a wave or two, he was really wanting to surf, which I get it. He also wanted me to learn the rhythms and the language of the ocean. So he said, hey, if you really want to go surfing, why don't you do junior lifeguards, and you can learn about the ocean. You can become a strong swimmer. You can learn that language, and then you can come surfing with me. So he didn't have teachers. He just had a bunch of people that would take him surfing with them. So I think it was just a different time. He grew up in Downey, so they'd just go down Beach Boulevard and surf Bolsa Chica and stuff like that. So for him, he was like, learn the ocean, and then you can come with me, because then I know that I can trust you in the water, because you'll know what's up. And I think that was honestly the best way to teach me, because we weren't arguing. As everybody know, if they have a partner or somebody they love, if they try and teach them how to surf, it's probably not helpful for the relationship, which is great to go learn from other people, right? But at that time, being a kid, I really got to understand the rhythms of the ocean. I really got to understand the rip tides and the way it moved. I really got to understand in a deeper way that rhythm and the cycles. And I think that really helped me to learn how to surf, because at the end of the day, surfing is really riding up, like standing up on a wave. But it's like, when do we even catch that wave? So it really kind of gave me a more, I think, vertical trajectory in when I started surfing. I learned a lot faster through that process.
Water safety and ocean knowledge were key then.
And being a strong swimmer. And feeling confident in the ocean. There's a lot of people that I teach now, and I'm grateful to teach now, probably because I didn't have necessarily a teacher, right? And that's actually how Natasha and I met, through one of our surf retreats that we do, and we got to connect that way. But really, it's like surfing is something that I'll do my whole life, and it's a way I navigate work, my life on land as well as in the ocean. And it's really through community and connection and being able able to share a couple things that took me a long time to learn on myself with people and help their trajectory and their awareness more within the ocean. But it's something that I experience a lot. People have a lot of fear around the ocean. People maybe don't feel confident in the ocean. They don't feel confident in themselves in the ocean because it is a big, beautiful, vast element that is the strongest force of nature. And as humans, we often feel small and we often feel fragile and we often feel overwhelmed in the immensity of the ocean and its raw power and life force.
Kassia, when we met in Sano at Salty Sensations, we talked a lot about the force of the ocean and the forces of nature. And one of the things that you said that stuck with me is how you've seen the ocean change in your lifetime as a surfer and as someone who cares about the ocean. And you described how when you were a kid, there used to be kelp off the coast, and how that's changed in a pretty short period of time. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think just too being a surfer and somebody who spends a lot of time outside, whether it's camping or on the beach or just, the elements really dictate and how the elements move and the winds and the currents and the tides and the ocean moves. I'm just in it all the time. And that is something that really, the 26 plus years I've been surfing off the California coastline and all over the world, I've seen a lot of drastic changes. And one of them being kelp and seagrass. And definitely during one point of time in my life, I lived down, because obviously it was a dream of mine to go live in San Diego. So I lived down in Oceanside and I was surfing the reefs between Cardiff and Swami's, which are two surf breaks in North County, San Diego. And there used to be these huge kelp beds out the back that would keep the wind down. And they would also feed the whole ecosystem that exists right there, keeping it in harmony. And I've seen those kelp beds disappear. I remember a lot more kelp in and around Cardiff as a break I surfed. I remember a lot more kelp in and around Leo Carrillo, a break that I surfed. Even Malibu, First Point, going up into Santa Cruz County, there's a lot of kelp there. And even so, when you're really talking to people, you're like, oh, actually, there's not as much kelp. So just witnessing, the kelp disappearing a lot off just the breaks that I surf alone. And then knowing that it's interesting seeing something and experiencing something from the surface or from the beach. You can see it visibly, but then it's really when you dive under, you really notice, wow, there's urchin barrens, there's, a lot of, reef and rock exposed where there used to be thriving kelp forests that were home to so many creatures and really, what is contributing towards them just disappearing so quickly has been something at the forefront of my thoughts,
And surfers have this kind of love-hate relationship with kelp, or maybe more hate than love sometimes when your fin gets caught on it. But as we know, and as a marine scientist and someone who's working on these issues, that kelp is really critical. And we've lost in some areas up to 95% of our kelp forests, as I know, and have been really helping kind of elevate this story around kelp and getting in the water and telling people this story. We're actually working on a film, Sequoias of the Sea, about what's happening with the kelp. So I'm so excited that the surf community is getting involved and that your voice is kind of elevating that issue.
Absolutely. And yes, definitely when you get stuck in the kelp, it's not that fun. I call it the ocean Xerox. It just Xeroxes you off the board. And at the same time, kelp is it creates a sanctuary, really. It's, sharks, the reason that there's no fatal shark attacks in Santa Cruz County itself, within that pocket is because there is so much kelp. And as you go up past the coast and there's not as much kelp, that's where the sharks are actually. And sharks are an essential part of the ecosystem. So I'm not saying no to sharks. I love sharks. They're so valuable and important in the ocean, as is every creature and life form in the ocean, a valuable and important part of that ecosystem, continuing to stay healthy and thriving. That being said, there's no shark attacks in the kelp. That's why all the otters are hanging in the kelp, and that's why all the seals are in the kelp, and the surfers were happy little creatures in the kelp fluffing around, and you don't really have to worry about a shark taking you out. Yeah, I definitely have more of a love relationship with kelp, and I know how important it is in just so many aspects of our larger, planet ecosystem, and how like a lot of our carbon is sequestered through, these kelp forests, and how it's like a really essential part of the food chain, and how it's really just an essential part of ocean health, and how that kind of like big heat blob that went through between like 2012 and 15 was also a huge contributing factor towards a lot of the giant starfish dying, and their being an essential part of like, they keep in check the balance of the urchins. And now there's these kind of like desert urchin barons that are kind of like ravishing through, and they're in zombie mode, just attacking each other, and they've eaten through all the kelp. And, there's just so many things. So as we're starting to see just more and more species and life forms not being as prevalent within these really fragile ecosystems, like everything just starts to kind of like fall apart.
It's interesting, kelp's like the new coral. These are the places as divers we love to go is coral reefs, tropical coral reefs, and kelp forest, both of which are in serious trouble because of climate change. Kelp also has that love-hate. You hate it when the kelp stalks try and rip the regulator out of your mouth, but it's an incredible habitat full of biodiversity and so much life, and you're always learning new things. Like I hadn't thought that kelp's also good for grooming the waves, for smoothing out the surf, for surfers like you, which is particularly important for somebody like yourself. You're a longboarder and you need really clean waves to do what you do, which is some incredible images I see of you nose riding, hanging your feet and your legs off the front of a longboard. Tell us a little bit about your style and how you developed it.
I mean, I think like that's it, like perfectly groomed waves. I grew up in the valley, and some of the closest beaches for me were the perfect point breaks of Los Angeles, Malibu, First Point, and Leo Carrillo, and Rincon being some of them, Topanga, which are all perfect right-hand point breaks, which really lend themselves to riding, classic style longboards in a classic style way, like those old Gidget movies, and, kind of some of the films that also really inspired me were really kind of like, I think, the things that I took into account when I started to find my own style within the ocean. And as you mentioned, David, it's interesting because really kelp does groom the waves. So as it filters out the wind, it's also an important filter for the waters, and so just thinking of kind of like how, it's a filter in a lot of different ways. Filters out our carbon and all that. So I think, yeah, it's perfectly groomed waves that really lend themselves to me having the time and space on long walls of perfect peeling rights that definitely help me to find my style on the ocean.
And like Rel Sun did in Hawaii, I think you bring a certain joy to California surf, and maybe also inspiration for a lot of women in the surf who were kind of women and people of color were not part of the California surf scene post-war, and that's changing. And how do you see that change in terms of the culture and in terms of your own role?
Yeah, I mean, I guess too, it's like Kathy, Kathy, the original Gidget. She was just down at Malibu the other day giving a talk to a bunch of people, and, really what she helped to inspire, It was really balanced at that time. I think there was like a lot of guys and girls hanging out at the beach, like community vibes. And that's really what has always been the scene at First Point Malibu. One of the first women to ever go down the line on a board, Vicky Flaxman, was at First Point Malibu. So I think there's always been like a really good balance between Malibu and obviously Gidget. And there's been a lot of female energy there that's felt like that. And I think the rest of the world, like in a lot of ways, is catching up. It's like the Hawaiians, like surfing was a sport of kings and queens. It wasn't, exclusive. It was very inclusive. And I think that is really spreading across the world. And there's been different times and places. Like I think finally, as much as that has been like kind of like part of it since the beginning, there was also a huge part when it started to be brought into the competitive arena, right? In the 70s and 80s. That's where it seemed like there was a shift. And that's where it seemed like more of kind of like a competitive male dominated energy was brought into surfing and the surf world. And that's when there was a lot of women out there surfing, and there's just not that much documentation of it because film was expensive. There's that new movie out, She Surfs, and I think it's called She Surfs or Surf Girl. I forget right now. And I apologize for not having the name. I'm like a little tired today. I've been surfing a lot, but I think it's She Surfs. And a lot of the women that were charging at that time, there's just not that much documentation of them. You brought up Rel Sun. There's not that much documentation of them because the magazines weren't paying for the filmers to process their film. And it was expensive to process film. And the magazines weren't buying stuff of women. So the men out there documenting, mostly men, out there documenting the surfing that was happening at that time, just weren't pointing the camera at the women. And they were out there charging just as much as the men. It's only been up until very recently that the surfing world has actually given equal pay to women when it comes to competition, has tried to give more of an equal venue to them. And we're seeing that, with the rest of our civilization as well. It's like really women fighting hard for getting equal recognition. And really now you're seeing it out there. The lenses are pointed at the women. The women are able to kind of like show what's up. And I think it's really important, but women have really been out there for a long time doing it, since the beginning of what surfing was, the king and queen of Hawaii surfing waves together. It's always been very inclusive. And it was just, I think, through that time of like, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, that it was like exclusively kind of being more male dominant. And now it's coming back to balance, which is awesome.
Coming into surfing a little bit later in life, and I was just trying to get a wetsuit for the Northern California cold water with a hood, with an integrated hood. Many of the surf companies wouldn't make wetsuits for women with a hood, that you could only find a men's suit. And now that, things are changing, and you've also created a whole line of wetsuits geared around women surfing. How did you get into obviously you've been in the water, you understand what you need to stay warm and comfortable and flexible in the water. Tell us about how you started making wetsuits.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So riding for my big sponsors as many years as I was, it was really hard. I would be going to somewhere super cold like Chile or Scotland, and I would have to get, a men's Quicksilver suit because they just didn't make wetsuits that were warm enough for us women in Roxy. And it was guys making our wetsuits, no women. So I actually started making wetsuits for Roxy, and I was drawing up designs. I was thinking about it all the time, thinking about different patterns that I wanted to wear, because how does a guy know what I want? I just heard this the other day that most bra companies are actually men. Which, like, how do they know what we want? How do they know what we need? Which is interesting. So I was like, man, I love the bros out there, thank you. And just as you don't want me designing a wetsuit for you, I'm sure, because I don't know what you need, you don't know what I need. So that's why I started developing, wetsuits for Roxy. And I think being a California surfer, we're in wetsuits all the time. for the most part. That being said, it was something that I was really inspired to do, and I left my sponsors to actually create my own line of wetsuits actually by women for women. You know, I have so many women. I was just surfing the other day and I met some woman in the water and she was ripping. I was like, "What's up?" And we were out there chatting. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I have one of your wetsuits. It fits me better than any other wetsuit I've ever had because I have hips." And I'm like, "Exactly. I have hips because I'm a woman and like I want a suit to fit me a certain way." So we were just vibing on that. And it's moments like that that really make me feel super grateful for, you know, how much hard work and dedication goes into what I'm doing. And then too, it's like, it doesn't make sense to, you know, invite people to send me their wetsuits and recycle them. Like, it's not effective for my bottom line, you know, to have the wetsuit recycling program. But nothing I do is for a bottom line. Nothing I do is for profit. It's all for the betterment, you know? And so being able to have this recycling program where wetsuits don't end up in landfills and I can recycle them with my friends at Suga Yoga and turn them into yoga mats and, you know, just invite people to think differently about the end of life cycle of what, you know, they are utilizing. Because at the end of the day, wetsuits are like a utilitarian product. You know, you kind of need a wetsuit to go surfing, or else in some places you would get hypothermia and not make it out, you know, just like a surfboard is a necessary tool to get you in the water. And I think the more people that are in the water are aware of our environmental issues and how much what we're doing as a species is affecting our natural environment. And it is up to us to make those choices to affect it in a positive way. And I really think that it's the lifestyle that people get into. And it's the lifestyle and that connection with nature, that connection with life in the purest, most raw form, that connection with riding waves, which is essentially you're like riding creation as it is happening in real time. And there's no two waves that are ever alike. It's that kind of, you know, waking up at sunrise and seeing the sunrise from the water and like riding those first waves in the light of day and seeing some otters maybe over there, some, you know, a whale in the background, or, you know, it's really these connections. So I think it's like a really deep and kind of spiritual connection that's beyond the rational mind that really gets people to surf. And then it's the connection and the community that happens on the beach in and around riding waves and sharing and collaborating that is what keeps people going back. Because yeah, a lot of them aren't going to be a professional surfer. And at the end of the day, I never started surfing to be a professional surfer. That was not anything that was even on my radar as like a thought. It happened, yes. And I'm going to surf forever. I'm actually more excited about surfing now than I ever have been in my life. And I stopped surfing professionally many years ago now when I left my sponsors.
I think you brought up something that really resonated for me when I started surfing is the community aspect of it. And at Salty Sensations, it really wasn't about learning how to surf or, you know, getting to the nose. It was about building that community and getting stoked about being in the water. And that's such a huge part of it. I mean, whether or not you catch the waves is almost secondary. In some ways, it's really about like being in the water and being with your surf buddies.
And it's also like, I remember as a kid, just like going to the beach with my dad, and like him and all the old dudes in the parking lot would just be sitting there drinking coffee, talking. It was a meeting point. They just wanted to go hang out with each other. Yeah, maybe we'd paddle out, maybe not, but it was a ritual, you know, and it was part of that ritual. And I think that's also what you're sharing, Natasha, and what we really, you know, also try to create. Yeah, I mean, we don't try, it is created in the environment of bringing together people for a retreat, because it's that connection with community, and there's, you know, community chats after, and people are meeting up this place, that place, and the other, and somebody has a cool podcast, they're sharing it, or somebody just made a book and they're putting it out there, and, you know, oh my gosh, we're celebrating each other. And I think that's what's so awesome and unique about surfing and surf culture, because it is more than a sport, it is a lifestyle.
I think things are changing and we're watching it happen in real time.
Yeah.
I hope, yeah, And I mean, you and all those friends of yours are doing some really cool stuff. And the idea is to create that momentum and get the bigger brands and the bigger companies to follow in that
That's
path.
it. It's like us all kind of like, okay, like everything, there's nothing about humanity that's sustainable. Not one thing about us as a species on this planet. Like nothing about the way that we live our lives or do anything currently is sustainable. So how do we collaborate and innovate in new ways that are going to be in more harmony with this planet? Like it's almost like we needed to find an edge to bounce off of. Like to find balance, you need to know where the edges are. You need to know what's in balance and what's out of balance, and then communicate towards finding more neutral ways of existing and being. So I feel like technology is at a point where it's giving us this opportunity, and it really takes the willingness to want to move forward.
Of the people,
yeah,
the surfers.
So Kassia, as one of the more well-spoken marine mammals we've had on the show, I'd like to thank you so much for being part of the Rising Tide Ocean podcast.
I love it. Thank you all for what you're doing and communicating. And I think it's conversations and collaboration that gives us the opportunity to move forward and give people solutions to be a part of and activate people, because I think it's easy to go into overwhelm over all the issues that exist. And it's through community and collaboration and conversations like this that we can hopefully move the needle and give people support and inspiration to be part of the change that we all, would be of benefit to be a part of.
Rising Tide is a production of Blue Frontier, co-hosted by David Helvarg and myself, Vicki Nichols-Goldstein, with support from Natasha Benjamin and Ellie Kurla. Rising Tide's editing services and technical support is provided by Studio Cape May. The theme song is written and performed by Ethan Kenvarg. You can find Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast, at bluefront.org or download it from Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Off in the salty ocean, off where the waves roll free, the sparkling water rises, then crashes to the sea. Out amongst the breakers, you'll have no need to fear. It's true, it's the Blue Frontier. Off in the salty ocean, off to the Blue Frontier.
Sparky, come here, buddy. Sparky! There you are. Good boy, Sparky.